Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. In Northeast Nigeria, more than 800,000 children are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition in 2021, including nearly 300,000 with severe acute malnutrition who are at imminent risk of death. United Nations Children's Fund says they make up the 10.4 million children projected to suffer from acute malnutrition this year from 5 countries. Today on the program, we'll look at how the food problem caused by COVID-19 and climate change can be solved. Do stay with us. Rice is a staple food for more than half the global population. But its cultivation uses 30 to 40% of the world's fresh water. And the United Nations-backed Sustainable Rice Platform says it is responsible for 10% of man-made emissions of greenhouse gas, methane. Netafim, a company that pioneered drip irrigation decades ago to grow produce like potatoes and melons across Israel's challenging arid landscape, has just finished a pilot scheme using its technology on 1,000 hectares of rice fields in locations from Europe to Southern Asia.
We have developed a full comprehensive solution to irrigate rice with drip irrigation. When converting paddies into drip, you need to change everything you knew about rice cultivation.
At one such location, at La Figiana farm in northeast Italy, 2 fields side by side grow a high-quality rice for risotto. One is flooded, covered entirely by up to 15 centimeters of water to maintain temperatures and keep away weeds. The other is crisscrossed with perforated pipes, delivering to the roots precise amounts of water, amounting to less than half the quantity used on the flooded field. The farm manager, Michel Conte, whose family has managed La Figiana for decades, has adopted the Netafim system on some of his land. For 3 years, the drip irrigation has yielded rice on par and at times even better quality than the flooded paddies. It also allows them to rotate crops throughout the year.
Producing 1 kilo of rice needs 5,000 liters of water. By using drip irrigation to grow rice, you can save 70% of the water. Means that you need to use only 1,500 liters for 1 kilo of rice.
Netafim said it had to learn from scratch how to achieve the same yield as flooding, and it took a decade to create a new protocol for watering, fertilizing, and planting rice with drip irrigation. The growing conditions switched to aerobic from anaerobic, which means methane emission goes to 0.
The rice cultivation in the world is responsible for 10% of the gas of methane emissions to the world. It's equivalent to all what the aviation industry sends methane to the world every year. And with our solution, it goes to 0. Moving the rice from paddy cultivation to drip irrigation cultivation allows the farmers to rotate the crops and do more than just rice. And with that, they improve their livelihood and they also enable to grow more food with less resources.
The initial investment in pipes, pumps and filters could be expensive for farmers whose profit margins are, for the most part, already thin. But the shift away from flooding is expected to gain traction.
We have finished the beta stage. That means we have 1,000 hectares commercially grown in many countries all over the world. Italy, India, Turkey, with great results and farmers that achieving the goals of saving 70% water, 0 methane emission, and great yields.
Demand for rice is expected to rise 25% by 2050, and rice paddies leave too big a footprint, says Win Ellis, Executive Director at the Sustainable Rice Platform. Drip irrigation was producing impressive results, doubling water productivity and getting more grain for every drop, he said. Experts agree rice cultivation needs to become more sustainable. And indeed, all food production needs to be more sustainable. Experts say before reaching our plates, our food is produced, stored, processed, packaged, transported, prepared, and served. At every stage, food provisioning releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Farming, in particular, releases significant amounts of methane and nitrous oxide, 2 powerful greenhouse gases. In line with projected population growth and changes in dietary habits, in favor of higher meat consumption. The global demand for food is expected to grow by up to 70% in the coming decades. Agriculture is already one of the economic sectors with the largest environmental impact. This substantial increase in demand will, unsurprisingly, create additional pressures. How can we meet this increasing global demand while at the same time reducing the impact of food production and consumption on the environment? Many say agric innovation is the answer. At a backyard farm in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, Sprout Organic, a locally owned company, mixes animal bone meal, seeds, foliage, dry leaves, twigs and kitchen waste, like banana peels, to concoct a composite that is sold to urban farmers to grow food in squeezed spaces.
Carrot peels, banana peels, tomatoes, as long as it's not acidic. So as you can see, it's really light and fluffy. It's more like, it looks like black cotton soil, but it's really not. It's purely organic matter that has been decomposed by the worms. We've tried and tested on a number of our clients' farms, and the result has been extraordinary. The feedback has been good, with some saying up to 96% germination rate with the seed mix that we've been able to come up with.
Ted Gachanga, an agronomist who co-owns Sprout and runs the business from his Nairobi residence, says their product resembles black cotton soil. Worms are usually added to the mixture to help it mature, a process that takes about 4 weeks.
When you introduce the organic carbon into the soils, you will end up having the beneficial microorganism breaking down both the organic carbon and the nutrients within the soil, making it easier for the plants to absorb.
Yeah.
A 20 kilograms bag sells at around $32. Ted said demand had risen by 10% during the pandemic, which has cut incomes and impinged food supply chains.
Now more than ever, people are seeing the need to grow their own produce. Because in the beginning, people weren't allowed to leave the houses to do the shopping, so you'd find most families it would be a bother for most families to go outside to do their grocery shopping. So people started realizing that they can make better use of their spaces to grow their own produce, even if it's just a few veggies like skuma, spinach, and also like the regular herbs that you can use as a garnish or dressing on your salads or food.
Close to around 100,000 people in Kenya have been infected by the COVID-19 disease since the first case was reported in mid-March 2020. Official data showed economic growth has slowed down sharply, with many job losses in sectors like tourism. Sprout employs 3 staff, and its owner says that although their technology is not new, they have patented the formula for the composite. They hope to expand production beyond Nairobi to cover other towns.
So instead of farming on this whole land, we were able to maximize just this space and fit around 3,000 plants.
From where we started, we have seen tremendous growth in people taking interest in planting in the balconies or in their backyards. So as a result of this, we have created systems that will aid them in this endeavor. So anybody can actually be an urban farmer.
71-year-old urban farmer Francis Wachira used to make a living by renting out tiny tin shacks he built. But the coronavirus pandemic meant his tenants could no longer pay him. Now he sells the produce from his plot, such as kale, spinach, and herbs, and says he earns around $9.23, saying he makes about $10 every day from his produce.
Because whatever we are doing here, we don't use fertilizer, we don't use insecticides. We are organic people.
As demand for food has increased in line with the burgeoning global population, the global food systems and the natural resources they rely on are already under strain. And in many places in the developing world, climate change impacts and vulnerability add extra pressure, threatening food systems, livelihoods, and health.
We hear a lot about how businesses are responsible for our food systems that are either broken or not pointing in the right direction or dysfunctional, and businesses are a big part of the problem. But governments don't realize how many levers they have and how influential they can be in changing the way their food system is set up. So a couple of examples. Most public sector agricultural R&D, research and development, is really focused on cereals. And that is entirely appropriate sort of 30 or 40 years ago when filling bellies is the main objective, getting rid of hunger. Now, hunger is still a massive problem, and it's increasing in some parts of the world, including in Africa. But an even bigger problem is nourishing people, making sure people eat more of the right kinds of foods and less of the wrong kinds of foods. And so agricultural R&D should be much more skewed away from cereals towards fruits and vegetables, pulses, nuts, fish, eggs, dairy, the things that are too expensive in many African and Asian and European markets for people to consume. They're being priced out. Agricultural R&D, raising the productivity, is one way of lowering the price and making it more available. Another way that governments could get more nutritious food to their people is through public procurement. Many governments are massive purchasers of foods for schools, for hospitals, for the judicial system. Rather than just buy cereals, think about putting some pulses into that mix. That's a way of building the demand for pulses and then stimulating the supply.
The last decade has witnessed a growing momentum around transforming the way smallholder farmers manage land in sub-Saharan Africa. To help improve smallholder farming, governments and development partners are working to create the policies, financial mechanisms, technological innovations and market opportunities. While these efforts are crucial for improving productivity, they do not address the long-term sustainability and resilience of the smallholder production systems. This is particularly the case in the dry lands, where the threat of land and soil degradation, water scarcity, and loss of biodiversity looms large.
Look at the way the food systems are changing and how dynamic and complex they are in many respects. It is very difficult for an ordinary farmer to understand those changes and therefore to change with the changes that are happening. As a result, they are quite often left behind the change process. Yes, they are changing, but maybe not as fast as they should because they don't have access to the information that will motivate them to change. So investing in information, understanding, data, knowledge, awareness for farmers and the structures that they work with or that support them is so fundamental a starting point for change to happen. That's the first point. The second point really is that it is not only farmers themselves who need to change. It is a whole system that needs to change. And quite often, the burden of change, at least from a farmer's perspective, is placed more on the farmer than on the rest of the system because the farmer is the one who is directly interacting with the environment. But everyone is complicit in crime, so to speak. So why should it be the business of the farmers alone to grapple with the problem and not everyone in the entire chain? So I think the point being that we need to crowd in everyone in the change process. That cost of change, the transitionist cost, needs to be borne by everyone along the chain. That narrative, unfortunately, is not coming so strong from the farmer's side. But I think we need to really amplify the message that it is not only farmers that need to change. In any case, the behavior of farmers themselves is a function of what happens outside the production area of the value chain. So let's look at the entire system.
Agriculture has always been deeply dependent on the weather, with farmers needing a steady mixture of sun, warmth, and rains in order to reliably produce the food that all of humanity depends on for survival. Now, these once predictable growing cycles are at risk from climate change, and smallholders are on the front lines.
If change is not going to be rewarding in significant terms, people are not going to be motivated to change. So what is this compelling value proposition that to enable a farmer to change in such a way that it becomes more environmentally responsive, nutritionally responsive, and in many other ways? What is the compelling value proposition we're selling? And is it going to bring significant outcomes to the farmer? sustainable outcomes for that matter. How do we ensure that by rebalancing the power relations between the producers and everyone else along the chain, you're able to claw back value to the farmer without necessarily changing the configuration of the current structures, but just trying to ensure that there's transparency, there's openness, and there's fairness and equity in the distribution of risk and return. That should enable farmers to do much more and earn much more from what they do.
About 80% of the world's food is produced by family farms, according to the United Nations. So climate change's effect on agriculture could have repercussions that reach far beyond individual farmers and their families. Unless humans take significant steps to reverse course and cut greenhouse gas emissions, the situation may continue to intensify. It is clear that the world will need to produce more food and that key resources are limited. Agriculture has high impact on the environment and the climate. Moreover, climate change affects and will continue to affect how much food can be produced and where. Who gets to produce what and where is a socio-political question and is likely to become more controversial in the future. The global competition for these essential resources, especially with the pending impact of climate change, is driving developed countries to purchase large patches of agricultural land in less developed countries. Such land purchases and climate change impacts raise questions about food security in developing countries in particular. Food security is not only a matter of producing sufficient quantities of food, but also of having access to food of sufficient nutritional value. This complex problem requires a coherent and integrated policy approach to climate change, energy and food security. Faced with climate change and competition for scarce resources, the entire food system will need to transform itself and be much more resource efficient while continuously reducing its environmental impact, including its greenhouse gas emissions.
With the data, we can really track, monitor the progress. We can really tell who are the poor, who are the vulnerable, and we can design certain policy to target our resources to make sure that poor and hungry people will benefit from our investment, from our policy. So that's investment issue. The second is capacity in analyzing the data, whether the government, whether the universities, or even NGO think tanks must have the capacity to analyze the data connected, to propose good recommendations for decision makers to make the right decision. So the capacity is also very important in analyzing the data and so on. Now finally, we must use the data to ensure accountability. If we have good data, if we have good metrics, we must communicate all these metrics to normal citizens so they know what we have been doing to track the progress and to give the government a pressure to make big changes to benefit poor people.
Sub-Saharan Africa's population is the fastest growing of any region in the world and on track to reach 1.4 billion by 2030. To stay on course for food and nutritional security, agriculture experts say represents a solution if the African governments can do better going forward. The drastic rise in food prices has raised serious concerns about food nutrition security across the world. While a coordinated response is urgently needed at international and regional levels, the effectiveness of country-level response is critical for responding to the crisis.
Current policy supports the production of stable foods, maize, wheat, cassava, and so on. But in the meantime, fruits, vegetables, maybe dairy products are not supported by the government. Whether it's production, the varieties, value chain development, they are not. So let's fix the policy. Stop, reduce the subsidies to some stable foods, crops, and to use that money, same amount of money, to support the production of more nutritious, healthy foods. So in this case, you have a balanced diet. Yeah, some maize, some cassava, some yam, but in the meantime, and nuts, fruits, vegetables, chicken, eggs, fish. So then you will be healthier, and probably it's also good for the environment.
given projected increases in global temperatures, which are likely to give rise to longer and more intense droughts, in addition to greater weather variability across parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The risks facing many of the world's most exposed households, those that rely on rainfall agriculture for their livelihood, are more pressing than ever. Analysis by the Africa Risk Capacity suggests that a widespread catastrophic drought in sub-Saharan Africa today could cost upwards of $3 billion in emergency assistance, which will put an unprecedented financial strain on African countries and donor countries' aid budgets.
They have competing priorities. So you are asking a government to look at tomorrow, day after tomorrow, when he has issues in front of him. You have education, you have health, you have security, for example. And security is tapping more and more resources from us. But having said that, remember, African Risk Capacity, ARC, was created by the African head of states. It means they are becoming aware that something must be done. And 33 countries have signed just in 3 years, quickly. So we are not pushing because we have to build the institution and then provide services. So it's difficult to be strong on the ground and then be able to provide the services. So we are going slowly. So the institution is there. Now they are seeing the proof of concept. And the proof of concept is encouraging people to come more and more. We have a lot of requests. ARC is becoming known.
As currently structured, the system for responding to natural disasters is not as timely or equitable as it should or could be. With much of the cost borne by farmers, international assistance through the appeals system is secured on a largely ad hoc basis after disaster strikes. And governments are forced to reallocate funds in national budget from essential development activities to crisis response. Only then can relief be mobilized toward the people who need it most, and it is often too late. Lives are lost, assets are depleted, and development gains reversed, forcing more people into chronic hunger, malnutrition, and destitution across the continent.
The first thing we do is to come to in a country, sensitize people, help them to understand what is disaster risk management really, and what is the risk profile of that country. Meaning, how the country is prone to drought, to flood, to cyclones. Some have all, some have one, some have two. And at that point, since you know what may happen to the country, you can then decide what kind of response you want to have. That's called preparedness. You prepare yourself, you have a plan. But you know what may happen, you have a plan, then you want to know how do you finance that plan. And that's where the ADRIFI program comes in. You say, let me take insurance, for example, and then if something happens, it will trigger, and then the insurance will give me the money to cover my people. Now, in our cycle, and this is important in responding to your question, we have set up the obligation for those who want to get access to our insurance to have a contingency plan that is pre-approved by the Board of African Risk Capacity. What does it mean? It means you cannot just go and say, hey, here I am, I want to have an insurance. No. You have to say, this is my risk, this is the part of that risk or the totality of the risk I want to cover, and I want to take an insurance that will help me to do that. Now, that plan should be approved first because it is robust, it is solid, then we allow you to have an insurance. So why? Because in such a situation, because you have a plan, it is robust, it is approved, it's a peer review kind of approval, then when the disaster occurs, when the money comes, you know where the money is going. It's not going somewhere else. It's going exactly for that purpose because you had planned earlier and you have allocated the resources to all the activities you wanted to do with.
Contingent funds linked to early warning systems and appropriate contingency plans linked with credible national response mechanisms offer the best solution for delivering more effective and efficient responses to weather shocks in the short term and can facilitate longer-term investment in increasing food security, disaster risk reduction, and climate resilience. By shifting away from the old paradigm of treating the effect after a crisis occurs, Africa can move towards effectively managing its risks. The challenges facing agriculture in Africa are many, but progress in the sector is possible when backed with political will, the right policies, and technology transfer to improve productivity and reduce post-harvest losses. There is also the need for farmers to have access to quality seeds and, of course, land reforms that will free up lands for food production. That's our program for today. Thank you for watching. We hope to be back with you next week. In the meantime, our inbox, earthfile@channelstv.com, is available for your comments and questions. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the Earthfile crew here in Lagos, it's bye for now.